Lonely rancher found a Cherokee girl bound to a tree until her peaceful warrior clan arrived. Wyoming, 1876. The prairie gleamed under a full moon, silver light casting shadows over frosted grass. Amos Kane's ranch stood alone, a weathered cabin nestled among maple trees, their leaves whispering in the cold night wind. Amos, a former mercenary who traded violence for solitude, sat by the fire. Its crackle his only company. At 42, his scarred hands and haunted gray eyes bore the weight of a bloody past. A faint cry pierced the howling wind sharp with desperation. Amos froze, gripping his knife, and stepped to the door, moonlight spilling across the porch. The cry came again, raw with fear. He grabbed his lantern, boots crunching on frozen earth as he followed the sound to a massive maple tree at his land's edge. Tied to it, arms twisted backward with coarse rope, was a young Cherokee woman, no older than 18. Her dark hair matted with blood clung to her face. Her torn dress revealed bruises, blood dripping from her wrists. Her terrified eyes met his as she whispered, "They'll burn everything if you help me." Amos knelt, his knife slicing through the ropes. "They'll have to get through me first," he said, voice low and steady. She collapsed, legs too weak to stand. Amos caught her, his rough hands gentle, lifting her slight frame. She flinched but didn't pull away. He carried her to the cabin, her fear heavy in the air. Glancing back, he saw torches flickering on the horizon, a warning of approaching danger. Inside, Amos set her by the fire, its warmth easing her chill. Her hands shook, blood smearing her wrists. He fetched a basin and cloth, kneeling to clean her wounds. "Hold still," he said, his touch careful as he washed away blood revealing bruises on her neck and a cut on her cheek. He wrapped her wrists in linen, his fingers steady from years of patching himself up. "Drink if you can," he said, placing a tin cup of warm water beside her. "You're safe here." Her dark eyes studied him, searching for deceit. She took a trembling sip, her gaze flicking to the door. Amos stood, peering out the window. The torches were closer, bobbing like predators. "Who did this to you?" he asked, voice soft but firm. "My stepfather," she whispered, voice breaking. "He sold me to them to pay his debts." Amos' jaw tightened. Memories of his own betrayal, sold to mercenaries by a father who chose whiskey over family, stinging his mind. He pushed the thought down. He reached for a woolen blanket, a cherished gift from a Cherokee woman who saved his mother during the war, its edges frayed with star and river patterns. Amos draped it over her shoulders, his hands steady. "My mother was saved by your people once," he said, voice barely a whisper. This was hers. Nahi's fingers brushed the blanket, her eyes softening, a spark of trust flickering. She pulled it tighter, a small act of acceptance. Amos checked the window again. The torches were distinct now, carried by at least 4 riders. Hoof prints scarred the earth near the tree, fresh and deep, signaling their return. He gripped his rifle, its weight familiar. "They're coming back," he said more to himself. Nanyahi's eyes had snapped up, panic in her voice. "You don't know what they're capable of," she said. "They'll kill you." Amos turned, his gray eyes meeting hers. "I've faced worse," he said, a shadow of his old life in his gaze. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, moonlight casting him as a sentinel against the storm. Nei watched from the fire's glow, the blanket a shield, wondering if this stranger could keep her alive. The cabin's fire cast flickering shadows on the wooden walls, its warmth struggling against the chill seeping through the cracks. Nanyahi sat by the hearth, the woolen blanket draped over her shoulders, her bandaged wrists resting in her lap. Her dark eyes followed Amos Kane as he moved about the small kitchen, his broad frame filling the space. He worked in silence, peeling potatoes with a steady hand, the knife flashing in the firelight. The scent of boiling water and earth filled the air, a simple promise of sustenance. Outside, the Wyoming night was alive with the howl of wind, but Amos' ears strained for another sound. Hooves, voices. Anything that might betray the riders he knew were coming. Nahi's voice broke the quiet, soft and hesitant. "They took me because my people wouldn't let them pass," she said, her gaze fixed on the fire. "The horse thieves. They wanted our land for their routes. My stepfather, she stopped, her fingers tightening on the blanket. Amos paused, his knife hovering over a potato, but he didn't press her. He knew the weight of words too painful to speak. "It's old me," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Said I'd settle his debts with Caleb Voss." Amos' jaw clenched, a spark of anger flaring in his gray eyes. He'd known men like Voss, men who traded lives like cattle, men he'd once served under in a life he'd sworn to leave behind. As a mercenary, he'd followed orders that stained his hands with innocent blood. Each death a stone added to the wall of guilt he carried. He turned back to the pot, stirring the simmering broth, letting Nahi's words settle. The act of cooking grounded him, a ritual to keep his own demons at bay. He wanted to ask more, to know the depth of her pain. But he saw the way her shoulders hunched, the way her eyes darted to the door. She wasn't ready. He crossed the room, retrieving an old leather hat from a wooden chest by the wall. It was worn, its brim softened by years of use, a relic from his mother, who worn it through harsh winters. She taught him kindness, even when the world offered none, and her death had left him adrift. Amos placed the hat beside Nanyahi, his voice low. "It kept my mother warm in the snow. It'll do the same for you." Nanyahi's fingers brushed the leather, her touch tentative as if testing its reality. She lifted it, smoothing her tangled hair before setting it on her head. The small act, adjusting her appearance, seemed to steady her, a reclaiming of dignity. Her eyes met his, gratitude mingling with caution. Amos returned to the window, peering into the darkness. The torches were closer now, their light flickering like stars fallen to earth. He counted at least 4, moving with purpose. His hand rested on the rifle propped against the wall, its cold metal, a reminder of the life he'd tried to escape. Nana's voice came again, quieter now, laced with dread. "They're coming tonight. They always do." Amos turned, his gaze steady. "Let them come," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made the air feel heavier. "They'll find more than they bargained for." He reached into his belt, pulling out a small knife, its handle carved with simple lines. It was no weapon of war, just a tool for carving wood or skinning game, but it was sharp and true. He held it out to her handle first. "For you, not me," he said. Nay hesitated, then took it, her fingers closing around it with a resolve that hadn't been there before. Her eyes, once clouded with fear, now held a spark of defiance. She tucked the knife into the folds of her dress, her posture straightening as if the blade gave her a piece of herself back. Amos stepped to the door, cracking it open to feel the night air. The torches were near enough now to hear the faint thud of hooves on frozen ground. He closed the door, barring it with a heavy plank, and turned to Nanhi. "Stay by the fire," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Whatever happens, you're not alone anymore." She nodded, clutching the knife, her eyes fixed on him as he prepared for the storm that was about to break. The dawn broke cold over Amos Kane's ranch. The Wyoming sky, a pale gray, strewn with clouds that promised snow. The fire in the cabin had burned low, its embers casting a faint glow on Nanya's face as she sat, still clutching the small knife Amos had given her. Amos stood by the window, his breath fogging the glass, his eyes scanning the horizon, where the torches had vanished hours ago. He knew better than to trust the quiet. Stepping outside, he knelt by the maple tree where he'd found Nanhai. The earth was scarred with fresh hoof prints, a jagged circle around the ranch, like wolves marking their territory. At least 6 horses, he counted, their tracks deep and deliberate. The horse thieves were close, watching, waiting. Back inside, Amos checked his hunting rifle, its barrel gleaming in the dim light. He glanced at Nanahai, her hands still trembling, but her gaze steadier now. "You ever shoot?" he asked, his voice calm but direct. She shook her head, her fingers tightening on the knife. Amos nodded, setting the rifle on the table. "Come here," he said, gesturing her closer. "You're going to learn." He showed her how to hold the weapon, his callous hands guiding hers, patient but firm. "Keep it steady. Aim low. Pull slow," he instructed, his voice a low rumble. Nahai's hands shook as she lifted the rifle, but she listened, her jaws set with determination. Amos stepped back, watching her practice the motion, her fear giving way to focus. Nanya lowered the rifle, her voice soft but clear. "They work for Caleb Voss," she said, her eyes meeting his. "The men who took me, they want Cherokee land, for gold." Amos' face darkened, his mind flashing to the war, to the men who'd used him to plunder and destroy for profit. Voss was no different. A man who saw land and lives as spoils to be claimed. "My stepfather owed him money." Na continued, her voice steadying. "Gave me to Voss to settle it. Said I was worth enough." Her words carried a bitter edge, and Amos felt a familiar anger rise, the kind that had once driven him to kill without question. He pushed it down, focusing on the girl before him. He crossed to a wooden box by the hearth, lifting the lid to reveal a silver necklace, its pendant carved with a delicate maple leaf. It had been his mother's, a gift from a Cherokee woman who sheltered her during a raid. Amos held it out to Nani, his voice low. "My mother said this was a promise of peace. It's yours now." Nahi's fingers brushed the pendant, her eyes widening as she traced the leaf's edges. The gesture seemed to anchor her, a reminder she was more than a bargaining chip. She slipped the necklace on, its weight, a quiet reassurance against her skin. Her lips parted in a faint smile, the first Amos had seen, and it stirred something in him, a flicker of hope. He'd thought long dead. A sharp knock at the door broke the moment. Amos grabbed his rifle, motioning Nane to stay back. He opened the door to find Eliza Moore, his nearest neighbor, her face pinched with suspicion. "You got a Cherokee girl here, Amos?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Voss's men are asking questions in town." Amos' grip on the rifle tightened, but his tone was even. "She's my guest. Tell Voss to stay off my land." Eliza's eyes narrowed, flicking to Nane, who stood by the fire, the necklace glinting at her throat. "You're stirring trouble," Eliza said. But there was a tremor in her voice, as if she knew more than she let on. She turned and left, her footsteps fading into the morning mist. Amos closed the door, his gaze returning to the window. The hoof prints outside were a warning, and he knew Voss's men wouldn't wait long. Nay stepped closer, her voice barely audible. "They'll burn this place down," she said, her eyes filled with dread. Amos met her gaze, his expression unyielding. "Not while I'm here," he said, his words a vow to both her and himself. He handed her the rifle again, pointing to the target he'd carved on a post outside. "Practice," he said. "We've got work to do." As Nay aimed, her hand steadier now. Amos felt the storm gathering, its weight heavy in the air. The Wyoming afternoon was heavy with the threat of snow, the air thick in Amos Kane's cabin as the fire burned low. Nanyahai sat on a stool, her fingers tracing the maple leaf necklace at her throat. Amos stood by the hearth, stirring embers, his shoulders tense with the coming storm. The hoof prints outside lingered in his mind, a sign Caleb Voss's men were near. The cabin was a fragile sanctuary holding back the world. Amos sat across from Nanae, the scarred table between them. "I wasn't always like this," he said, voice rough. "A mercenary taking orders, spilling blood." His gaze dropped to his scarred hands. "I killed a Cherokee family, a mother, father, 2 boys, just followed orders." His voice cracked, confession raw. "This ranch, this solitude. It's my penance." Na's eyes widened, but held no judgment. She leaned forward, voice soft. "My name is Nanyahii," she said. "It means one who walks the path. My mother gave it to me." Amos met her gaze, seeing understanding. "You're still on that path," he said, steady, despite the ache in his chest. "And I'll walk it with you." The words were a vow binding them. Nahi's lips parted, hope breaking through her guarded expression. She felt seen, not as a victim, but as a person with purpose. Amos crossed to a workbench, picking up a piece of maple wood. His knife carved a delicate leaf, mirroring her necklace. He worked silently, the scrape of metal blending with the fire's crackle. He placed the leaf beside her, voice low. "This is for your journey," he said. "You're not lost anymore." Nyahi clutched the wood, eyes shining with unshed tears, a silent acceptance of the new beginning. Nanyahii began to hum, a Cherokee folk song rising, soft but heavy with stories of rivers and stars. Amos listened, transfixed, memories of his mother stirring. "She was like you," he said as the song faded. Voice a whisper. "My mother saved a Cherokee girl during a raid. Hid her, fed her, but she couldn't save herself. Pain lingered raw after years. You remind me of her. She never gave up." Nanyahi's eyes softened, their shared loss weaving a fragile bond. "My mother sang that song," she said, voice trembling. "She said it would guide me home." Amos nodded, the connection unbreakable. He checked the rifle by the door, movements deliberate. The torches hadn't returned, but Voss's men were close. "They'll come soon," he said, resolute. "But they won't take you." Nanae rose, clutching the carved leaf, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, defiant. Amos saw her strength like his mother's, and nodded, a silent promise to protect her from Voss and his own darkness. The cabin felt smaller, not confined, but heavy with their shared resolve, a vow forged in silence. The Wyoming night was black as coal, the moon hidden behind thick clouds that smothered the stars. Amos Kane's cabin stood like a fortress, its windows shuttered, the fire reduced to embers to avoid drawing eyes. Amos crouched by the front window, rifle in hand, his gray eyes scanning the darkness. Nahi knelt beside him, clutching the rifle he'd taught her to use, her hands steady despite the fear in her breath. The air was heavy with the scent of frost and danger, the silence broken only by the distant howl of a wolf. Then came the sound they dreaded. Hooves thundering, growing louder, closer. Torches flared in the distance, their orange glow slicing through the night. Caleb Voss and his horse thieves had come. "They're here," Amos whispered, his voice low but calm. Nahi nodded, her eyes fixed on the approaching lights. The first torch sailed through the air, landing in the dry hay of the stable. Flames erupted, painting the night in red and gold. The crackle of burning would mingling with the shouts of men. "Stay low," Amos said, pulling Nahi behind the cabin's thick wooden wall. He cracked the shutter, aimed, and fired, the shot echoing as a rider cried out and fell. Nahi lifted her rifle, her hands trembling, but sure, she fired, and another man dropped, clutching his shoulder, her eyes widened, a mix of shock and pride. "I hit him," she said, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Amos glanced at her, a flicker of pride breaking through his focus. "Good," he said, reloading. Keep going. But his chest tightened with worry. Each shot she fired made her a target. The flames spread, licking the stable's walls, and Voss's voice cut through the night. Hand her over, Cain, he bellowed, or we burn it all. Amos fired again, his shot grazing a horse, sending it rearing. You'll have to take her, he shouted back, his voice steady as stone. Nanae fired once more, her aim true, and another rider fell, proving she was no longer the helpless girl tied to a tree. The name Nanae, one who walks the path, had given her a strength she hadn't known she possessed. In the chaos, Amos reached into his pocket, pulling out a single bullet, its casing etched with a delicate maple leaf, a keepsake he'd carved years ago for luck, a habit from his mercenary days. He pressed it into Na's hand, his voice soft but urgent. This is for luck, he said. You're stronger than they know. Nanya's fingers closed around the bullet, her lips curving into a fleeting smile, a spark of courage igniting in her eyes. She loaded it into her rifle, her movement sure, and fired again, the shot ringing out as the flames roared higher. The tide shifted when shadows moved beyond the firelight. Not Voss's men, but others, silent and swift. The Cherokee had come, led by Sia, Nanae, a tall woman with eyes like polished obsidian. They emerged from the darkness. Their horses moved without sound, their faces painted with resolve. Sia raised a hand, and her warriors fanned out, not attacking, but hurting Voss's men with eerie precision. They drove the thieves toward a narrow ravine beyond the ranch where the earth was loose from recent rains. The ground gave way, swallowing horses and riders in a slide of mud and stone, their torches snuffed out in the collapse. Voss's screams faded into the night, trapped but alive. Sia dismounted, her gaze locking onto Amos as Nay ran to her, the carved bullet still clutched in her hand. You kept her safe, Sia said, her voice steady but probing. But why? Amos met her eyes, his voice raw. I killed your people once under orders I should have refused. I've carried that sin for years. Protecting her is my atonement. Sioa's face softened, her hand resting on Nahiai's shoulder. You've walked a hard path, she said, her words carrying forgiveness. Nahi looked between them, her heart swelling with a new sense of belonging. The fire still burned, but the night was no longer theirs alone. The Cherokees stood with them, a silent vow against the storm. The ravine was a jagged scar in the Wyoming earth, its walls slick with mud from the recent collapse. Dawn's first light filtered through the clouds, casting a pale glow on the trapped horse thieves, their shouts muffled by the debris. Amos Cain stood at the edge, his rifle still warm from the night's battle, his gray eyes scanning the wreckage. Nanae stood beside him, her mother Sequoia's hand on her shoulder, the Cherokee warriors forming a silent circle around them. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and charred wood from the burned stable, but the immediate threat was gone, except for Kay Voss, who had vanished in the chaos. Amos' jaw tightened, knowing a man like Voss didn't simply disappear. Soya's gaze, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Amos. You fought for my daughter, she said, her voice steady but searching. But there's more to you, isn't there? Amos' heart pounded, the weight of his past pressing against his chest. He glanced at Anai, her eyes wide with trust, and knew he couldn't hide any longer. During the war, he began, his voice rough. I was a mercenary. I followed orders even when they were wrong. I killed your brother, Sioa, a young man barely 20, in a raid I had no right to join. His words hung heavy, each one a stone lifted from his soul. I've lived alone since, punishing myself for it. Sioa's face tightened, pain flashing in her eyes, but she didn't look away. Nanya's breath caught, her hand clutching the maple leaf pendant. Silence stretched, broken only by the distant groans of Voss's trapped men. Finally, Sia spoke, her voice soft but firm. You've chosen a different path now. The words were a balm, releasing a burden Amos had carried for years. He exhaled, his shoulders sagging, the guilt not gone, but lighter, as if shared. Nanyahia's eyes shone with pride, seeing her mother's forgiveness and Amos's courage intertwine. Amos reached into his belt, pulling out a small knife, its handle carved with an eagle in mid-flight. It had been his mother's, a gift from her Cherokee friend, a symbol of protection for those seeking peace. He held it out to Nani, his voice low. This was my mother's, he said. She said, it protects those who seek peace. Nanyahai took the knife, her fingers tracing the eagle, her expression softening. Zoya watched, her lips curving faintly, and the warriors around her nodded, their silence a mark of respect. The gesture, simple yet profound, bound Amos to them. No longer an outsider, but a friend who had earned their trust. As the Cherokee warriors freed Amos and Nanae from the ravine's edge, leading them back to the smoldering ranch, one of them handed Amos a crumpled letter found among the debris. It was from Voss, written in haste, its words chilling. You can't hide her forever, Kane. I'll be back and I'll take everything. Amos' grip tightened, his eyes meeting Nanyahi's. She nodded, her resolve mirroring his. We need to stop him, she said, her voice steady, no longer the frightened girl tied to a tree. Sia placed a hand on her daughter's arm, her gaze fierce. We'll go to the town, she said. Voss's crimes will be known. Amos folded the letter, tucking it into his coat. We'll face them together, he said, looking from Nanya to Sioa. The Cherokee warriors gathered evidence from the ravine. Stolen goods, maps of Cherokee land marked for gold, proof of Voss's greed. Nanya clutched the eagle knife, its weight a reminder of her strength, her mother's pride, and Amos' vow. The ranch loomed ahead, its charred stable a testament to the night's violence. But the rising sun promised a new fight. Amos felt lighter, unburdened by Sioa's forgiveness, ready to stand with Nanae and her people. They would go to the town not as victims, but as warriors bearing truth, united against a man who thought he could break them. The midday sun hung low over the Wyoming prairie, casting long shadows as Amos Kane, Nenyahii, and Sioa rode into the dusty streets of Willow Creek. The town was a cluster of weathered storefronts and saloons, its people pausing their work to stare at the trio. Amos, the reclusive rancher with a shadowed past. Nanyahii, the young Cherokee woman with a maple leaf pendant glinting at her throat. And Sioa, her mother, a proud warrior whose presence commanded silence. Behind them, Cherokee warriors carried a satchel of evidence, maps, stolen goods, and Caleb Voss's threatening letter. The townsfolk whispered, their eyes sharp with suspicion, some muttering about savages and troublemakers. Amos dismounted, his rifle slung across his back, his gray eyes steady as he faced the growing crowd. Nani stood close, her hand brushing the eagle knife at her belt, her posture tense but resolute. Sia's gaze swept the crowd, unyielding her presence a quiet challenge to their prejudice. The air crackled with tension as Sheriff Harlan, a wiry man with a badge pinned to his vest, stepped forward. "What's this about, Kane?" he demanded, his hand resting on his revolver. "Folks say you're hiding a Cherokee girl, stirring up Voss's men." Amos met his gaze, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not hiding anyone. This is Nanyahii, and she's here to tell the truth about Caleb Voss." The crowd murmured, their skepticism palpable. A man in a worn hat shouted, "Why should we trust her? Cherokee bring nothing but trouble." Nahi stiffened, but Amos raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "I was a killer once," he said, his voice carrying over the street, raw and unyielding. A mercenary who took innocent lives, Cherokee among them. I carried that shame for years, living alone to escape it. Then I found Nani tied to a tree, left to die by Voss's men. She made me a protector. His words hung in the air, heavy with confession. Nanyahia's eyes met his pride flickering in her gaze, her fear giving way to strength. Eliza Moore, the neighbor who'd once eyed Amos with suspicion, stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Voss threatened my family," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Told me to keep quiet about his dealings, or he'd burn our farm." I was too scared to speak, but Kane's telling the truth. Voss is a snake. The crowd shifted, whispers turning to murmurs of doubt about Voss. Choya opened the satchel, revealing maps marking Cherokee land for gold and stolen goods tied to Voss's crimes. "This man preys on us all," she said, her voice steady as stone. "He sold my daughter to settle his debts." Amos reached into his coat, pulling out a leather cord necklace, its pendant carved with a delicate flower, a piece he'd crafted in the quiet hours of the previous night. He turned to Nanae, his voice soft but clear. "This is your fire," he said, placing it around her neck. "You lit up my world." Nahi's fingers brushed the flower, her eyes shining with emotion. The gesture, simple yet profound, struck the crowd. Eliza's hand went to her mouth, tears welling, and others in the crowd softened, their hostility melting under the weight of Amos' sincerity. A woman in the back whispered, "He's changed," and heads nodded. The town seeing Nanyahai not as an outsider, but as a survivor. Sheriff Harlan studied the evidence, his jaw tight. "If this is true, Voss is done," he said. A burly blacksmith, Tom Grayson, stepped forward. "I've lost horses to Voss's men," he growled. "If Kane and the Cherokee are willing to fight, so am I." Others voiced agreement, their fear of Voss giving way to resolve. Nani, he stood taller, the flower necklace a symbol of her place, not just with her tribe, but in this town. Amos felt a weight lift. The town's acceptance a step toward redemption. His past no longer a chain, but a bridge to something new. Sequoia nodded to Amos, a silent acknowledgement of his courage. "We'll find Voss," she said, her voice a promise. The crowd parted as the trio prepared to leave, the Cherokee warriors mounting their horses, the evidence in hand. Amos looked at Nanae, her face radiant with purpose. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded, her voice firm. "For the first time, I am." The town watched them go. No longer strangers, but allies united against a common enemy. Their trust forged in the truth spoken under the sun's unyielding gaze. Spring revived Amos Kane's Wyoming ranch, wildflowers blooming across the prairie. The burned stable was rebuilt with new beams raised by Cherokee warriors and Willow Creek town's folk working together. Amos hammered a nail into a plank, his gray eyes bright with purpose. Nanyahi tied hay bundles nearby, her maple leaf pendant and flower necklace shining. Hammers, laughter, and Cherokee songs filled the air, a harmony of unity. Sequoia led her warriors hauling logs with pride. Eliza Moore brought bread, her sons carrying tools. Tom Grayson, the blacksmith, forged braces for the stable, his voice warm with gratitude. The townsfolk, once wary of Nanya, now shared meals, their distrust fading. Amos watched Nanyahai smile with a Cherokee warrior, her fear gone. The ranch, once solitary, now thrived, alive with community. By the maple tree where Nani was found, Amos and Nani carved a totem from oak. Amos shaped a maple leaf. Nani etched an eagle in flight. The totem symbolized their journey, resilience, and unity. Sia blessed it with a prayer, her words grounding the moment. Townsfolk watched, some bowing, others holding hands. Moved by the ritual, Amos turned to Nanyahai, his voice low. "You gave this place a soul, Nanyahai," he said. Her eyes met his, warm as the spring sun. Nani taught town children under the maple, showing them how to weave bow strings from sinew. The children eager called her teacher, their laughter ringing out. A girl with braids beamed as Nanyahi praised her chord. Townsfolk watched, softened by Nani's bridge between worlds. Amos sometimes joined, carving patterns with the children, his laughter a rediscovered joy. His past was no longer a cage, but a story he'd overcome. Nanya felt her name define her. A woman of strength embraced by a community that saw her as kin. The flower necklace, eagle knife, and totem were her anchors, symbols of her fire and place. She looked at Amos, the man who gave her a home, a name, a purpose, their bond deeper than words. As night fell, a full moon bathed the ranch in silver. The Cherokee gathered around the totem, faces painted, voices rising in a song of thanks. Sequoia led, scattering sage into a fire, its smoke curling to the stars. Townsfolk stood nearby, some holding hands, united in the ceremony's grace. Amos and Nanyahai stood by the maple tree, its branches whispering. He looked at her, his voice a whisper. "Some stories start with blood," he said. "Ours started with a tree and a moon." Nai grasped his hand, her voice steady. "And we found peace." The fire crackled, the song soared, the prairie vast under the moonlit sky. The totem stood tall, its leaf and eagle glowing, a testament to a reborn ranch, a united people, and two souls who found home. The Wyoming prairie stretched silent under the fading moonlight. The great maple tree standing as a sentinel over Amos Kane's ranch.